All right, so we talked a little bit about pain, and now we're going to start talking about sort of how pain is created through nociception and pain matrix. Now we're going to talk about how pain is controlled. So we've talked about this a little bit in modalities class. We talked about gate theory. So kind of the typical response, you hit your thumb with a hammer, you withdraw the thumb, maybe you yell, you apply pressure to it, and sort of the first scientific explanation of how pressure and other external stimuli inhibit pain transmission was the gate theory. And that was proposed by Melzack and Wall in 1965. So the original theory, some of the details are not quite all there, or maybe a little bit incorrect, but the original theory is important because it inspired inquiry into the mechanics and control of pain, such as using TENS to control pain. So we talked about that last quarter. The development of gate theory is called the counter-irritant theory. It incorporates findings from research that was stimulated by gate theory. And the theory behind the counter-irritant theory explains the inhibition of nociceptive signals by stimulation of non-nociceptive receptors, and it all happens in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So we talked about it last quarter about how you have those A delta and C fibers that are causing pain, and the A beta fibers, the mechanoreceptors, come in and they synapse with those C fibers and they close the gate, basically. That's our gate theory. So in the counter-irritant theory, it's sort of the same thing, but it actually has gotten down to the neuron level, where that A beta neuron actually synapses, instead of the C fiber is going up the spinal thalamic tract, or the A delta fiber, the A beta fiber actually synapses with an interneuron, which then synapses with the nociceptor, blocking the pain. So we have it now down to the neuron level. So the counter-irritant theory actually came out as a result of the pain research into the pain theory and got down to that neuron level. So the processing of somatosensory information in the dorsal horn can be altered by abnormal neural activity or by tissue injury. So the 4 states of dorsal horn processing are normal, we like that, suppressed, sensitized, or reorganized. So normal is what we normally have. The sensory information comes into the dorsal horn, it goes up, it synapses with the second order neuron, which goes up the dorsal column or the spinothalamic tract in the anterolateral column, to the midbrain, where it synapses with the third order neuron, which goes to the cerebral cortex. That's normal. Suppressed is where the maybe that A beta fiber comes in and synapses with the interneuron, which suppresses that signal. Sensitized is where it's oversensitive, and now it's sensitive to innocuous stimuli. And reorganized is where the synapses have been all messed up, and maybe you have an A beta fiber coming in that is going up the spinothalamic tract, causing a pain signal. So that's reorganized. So when we talked about, in the neuroplasticity chapter, when we talked about the reorganization of the neurons after an injury, that can actually end up causing you pain problems, because neurons that weren't previously transmitting pain signals can learn to transmit pain signals. So neuroplasticity can be a good thing for learning, but it can also be a bad thing for reorganizing the nervous system to preferentially process pain. Not good. So anti-nociception is the suppression of pain in response to stimulation that would normally be painful. So endorphins are endogenous substances that activate anti-nociceptive mechanisms. Opiate receptors are receptor sites that bind with both endorphins and those are endogenous opiates, and external opiates, like medications and whatnot from the outside world. Brainstem areas that provide intrinsic anti-nociception, so that's our descending system, neuronal descending system. It arises in the rostral ventromedial medulla. You don't need to know that, just say the medulla. The periaqueductal gray area in the midbrain, and the locus ceruleus in the pons. Locus ceruleus just means blue area, and that is the area in the brain where a lot of serotonin is produced. And those areas all affect the neuronal descending system. So there are 5, we're going to present this 5-level anti-nociception model. And there's a really nice little picture on page 215 that kind of shows the structures that are involved with the individual sites of anti-nociception. So level 1 occurs in the periphery. So it's our peripheral sensory nerves that are affected in level 1. So anti-nociception can happen in the periphery, and we'll talk about how. Level 2 occurs in the dorsal horn. So that's our gate theory / counter-irritant theory. So we're using counter-irritant to affect transmission of pain in the dorsal horn of the spinal column. Level 3 is the fast-acting neuronal descending system, and that's what we just talked about with the periaqueductal gray area, etc., in the midbrain. And the kind of things that might function there are like the low-rate TENS. Might. It's not been proven, but it's speculated that that's where it's happening. Level 4 in the anti-nociception model is the hormonal system. So things that are secreted by the pituitary gland, the beta endorphins, and the adrenals. And level 5 is the amygdala and cortical level. And that is descending inhibition from the cerebral cortex and the amygdala. That's like the mom lifting the car off the baby. That's you're so stimulated from other things, from emotional or physical things, that your cerebral cortex decides you don't have time for pain and deals with it. So those are all the different sites of anti-nociception, and we'll talk about the individual, each individual one. So in the periphery, that's where non-narcotic analgesics like aspirin decrease the synthesis of prostaglandins, which prevent the nociceptors from becoming sensitized. So that's how the NSAIDs, anti-inflammatories, and aspirin work. They're at that level 1 anti-nociception. So the other things that work there are topical menthol and capsaicin to desensitize nociceptors. So, Bengay and sports cream and all that stuff. That's level 1 anti-nociception. So level 2 anti-nociception occurs in the dorsal horn via local inhibitory neurons releasing enkephalin or dynorphin. This is the level of the counter-irritant system. So this is the examples of how we use this include superficial heat and high-frequency, low-intensity TENS. So activity in collateral branches of non-nociceptive afferents decreases or prevents transmission of nociceptive information to the second-order neuron in the spinal cord. So basically, the peripheral sensory information is preventing that nociceptor information from going up the spinothalamic pathway. That occurs in the dorsal horn. That's the gate. The gate is closed, or the counter-irritant theory. Level 3, the fast-acting neuronal descending system, involves the periaqueductal gray area, the medulla, and the locus ceruleus. And it's naturally occurring, or it sometimes can be stimulated with narcotics, or potentially theorized that low-rate TENS. The level 4 is the hormonal system, which involves the periventricular gray area in the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal medulla. So it's all of the sites in our our nervous system, our endocrine system, that release hormones that can help control pain. Level 5 is the cortical level and the amygdala or emotional level. So excitement, distraction, and placebo all play a role in adjusting the transmission of nociceptive signals. So placebo anti-nociception is effective in some people and activates higher order cognitive and brainstem areas that are activated by opiate drugs. So that's interesting. The placebo effect actually activates those same levels that are activated by opiate drugs. And it's not as bad for you, so that's probably a good thing. Some dentist office will have like little headsets that you can watch a movie on, and that's sort of in the distraction level. And some people kind of do like a self-hypnosis thing, and that's at that cortical level. So lots of different things can affect pain at the cortical level, and it's a naturally occurring thing, again, which is kind of neat. So pro-nociception is the opposite of anti-nociception, and it's the biological amplification of nociception. So whereas pain transmission can be sort of damped down at several levels, pain transmission can also be intensified at several levels. So edema and endogenous chemicals can sensitize free nerve endings in the periphery. And pro-nociception can also occur when a person is anxious or depressed. So the stress and depression and fear and all those things can biologically amplify pain. So we'll talk about nociceptive chronic pain in the next section, and then we'll bridge into chapter 12 where we start talking about neuropathic chronic pain.